My name is Willis Griffith, and I'm a first-time candidate running for state representative in Ward 11. I'm the head soccer coach and an academic support teacher at New Hampton School. I'm also completing my Master of Public Policy from UNH, where I captained the Division I soccer team this past fall. I'm running for state rep because we need change in our state. People are leaving New Hampshire for jobs and college. Public schools are not funded effectively, and the opioid crisis is testing our communities. We need new ideas, perspective, and energy to push for a New Hampshire that leads the way in public education and family-friendly policies by relying on our strong communities. I had an opportunity to come home to New Hampshire after graduating from college to be near my family and pursue a master's degree. It is important for me to be around my mom, dad, and sister. Every family has their struggles. For mine, it was filing for bankruptcy, a failed small business, and health issues. I recognize my family's challenges are not unique, and all families face their own. Because of this, I want New Hampshire to be the best state possible for my parents as they get older. I want my sister to come back after college for a great job and affordable housing. I want Manchester to thrive on its strong public schools, safety, and sense of community. I'm running for state representative to make New Hampshire an even better place for our families by fighting for public education, increasing access to affordable housing, health care, and child care, and prioritizing a grassroots solution to the opioid crisis. No voice is too small to be heard, and we can work together to amplify the issues that matter most to Manchester. Thank you, and I hope I can count on your support this fall.
Manchester, and welcome to Ward 13 on Manchester Public Television. Ward 13 is typically hosted by John Hopwood, and I'd like to begin by thanking John. He has made a concerted effort to bring some of the candidates from Manchester and its surrounding areas to the table, particularly those that have primaries, so that you can get to meet some of them prior to the primary. So thank you to John, and thank you to the people here who have been so supportive of us. I'm Connie Van Houten. I'm a state representative for District 45, Hillsborough District 45. I represent Manchester Wards 10, 11, and 12, the west side, from Hooksett to Bedford. I am also one of those candidates that I was talking about. I am also a primary candidate. I do have a primary on actually 2 weeks from yesterday, 13 days out, I believe. And I am running for re-election for state representative in that district. I have brought to the table, courtesy of John Hopwood and others, 2 candidates that I'd like you to meet. The first is one that you saw a promo on a few moments ago. And let me just clarify on that. That promo was when this gentleman first ran. It was 2 years ago. It still has a lot of relevance in that there are things that happen in the state legislature that take a while to happen, and things that have happened in the state legislature because of COVID that need to be revisited that hopefully we would have taken care of in the past. So let me begin by introducing, first of all, State Representative Willis Griffith, who represents Ward 11 on the west side. And Willis, I'd like you to introduce yourself a bit. Who are you? What's your background? Why did you run? Why are you returning to run again, please?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Connie, for having me, and thank you, John, as well, for having all of us. It's great to be back on here again. As Connie mentioned, that video was from a couple years ago, and as she also mentioned, a lot of those issues are incredibly relevant now. For me, and running this time around, all of those issues were exacerbated by the pandemic, so we know that the pandemic didn't create housing issues. It didn't create issues with our schools. It didn't create restrictions on access to services. Those all occurred and were incredibly relevant before the pandemic and have been exacerbated since. And that's why I'm running, because I ran on those issues 2 years ago and fought incredibly hard in the legislature to bring education funding and resources back to Manchester, along with my seatmate and yourself, Connie. And it's incredibly important that we get back there this term and continue to fight for public education, affordable housing, paid family leave, and so much more. In the State House this past year, I served on the Ways and Means Committee, dealing with anything that was related to state revenues. So one of our big goals is property taxes here, and I hope we have a chance to talk about bringing people's property taxes down, but also equitable public education across the state. It's an incredibly important issue, and I think it's got to be the top priority for folks. Education is really a central issue, as is the environment and healthcare. We have to take them all in one breath and really consider them. I was also the the elected chairman of the Young Democrats Caucus. Our 32-member caucus prioritized and strategized different legislative approaches for a number of bills, as well as help elevate the voices of the young leaders and young advocates across New Hampshire. In addition to that, towards the end of the term, I was selected to be an assistant majority leader with the Democratic Party as well. And a tremendous amount of thanks is necessary for both Patty and Connie, because you both supported me, both in my campaign the first time around and in the State House, and certainly would not have had the success in putting policies through that I felt like I had without the guidance and mentorship of both of you as well. So thank you for having me, and I'm excited to be here.
Welcome, Willis. It's great to have you here. Before I introduce our second guest, let me just briefly say what Willis is talking about here. The guests with me today are both from Ward 11. They are both incumbents running for state representative in Ward 11. I represent 10, 11, and 12. We also have representatives from 10 and 12. And we don't run as a team per se, but we run as a collegial group. We help each other out. We balance the different ideas. We're all on different committees. We're different ages. And so that's what I think Willis is referring to. I think we have a terrific group of collegial, contemplative, intelligent people on the West Side, all of whom are made stronger by the relationships that we have among each other. That also brings me to our next guest, and I'd like to introduce her right now, too, because she's part of that intelligent and collegial group to which I refer. My next guest is Representative Patricia, or we call her Patty, Cornell. She's also from Ward 11, and according to our structure in Manchester, each of the wards gets 2 state representatives. And then there are some odd dynamics that lead to the flotarial, which is where I run. Patty, I'll let you introduce yourself before we continue.
My name is Patty Cornell, and I'm running for my 4th term as a state representative. If you caught the show a few weeks ago, you've already heard a lot of my biographical data, but I'll repeat it. I'm a lifelong resident of Manchester. Went to public schools in Manchester and attended the University of New Hampshire. I've lived in my house on the Ward 11 for 42 years with my husband, and I was a guidance counselor at the middle school of Parkside for 36 years. So I really do have very strong ties to Manchester and to Ward 11. I also served as a waterworks commissioner in Manchester for 2 terms, that's 6 years, which when I think of all the water problems that many districts in New Hampshire are having with their water and the terrible water pollution that's happening, it makes me so thankful for the water that we have in Manchester, because if you just look at it, it's sparkling clean, and the waterworks department is so protective and so innovative at keeping our water up to date. I think it's ranked one of the top waters to drink in the country. I'm also a Manchester Library trustee, and I've been there since 2008. So I'm really aging myself with all these large numbers, but and the library, I'm happy to say, is now open again for hours, and you can find that online for very brief visits. A lot of cleansing going on, a lot of precautions that have been put in place, but I think it's something that's been missed to Manchester, with the library being closed and only open for curbside for the past couple of months. But I do serve on the education committee in Concord. I was the prime sponsor last term of a bill that behavioral wellness in schools, mental health in schools, which my commission has been working on diligently, but kind of cut off now, so we'll see what will happen before November. But other things did get passed that put things in place for that. But I do want to say that for the 3 of us, we're on committees that I think are the 3 committees that have the most bills. I think Connie's, I was looking this morning, had 110 bills last year. That's just in 1 year. That's not for the 2 years. I had 89, and Willis, I think you had
Several bills in addition to the revenue side of the budget.
Yeah,
estimations.
so a lot of bills. So I don't know if people realize how much time actually goes into being a state representative. It's, from January to June, sometimes 3 days a week. So it's very hard for a young person like Willis, to be able to do that in addition to support himself and work and have a job.
Absolutely.
So, you know, you've got to commend the young people for doing it, because it's really tough.
And I just want to quickly round out, too, just by mentioning my committee as well. We do have the most bills. We often went 4 and 5 days a week because of the quality of our bills, and because of our commitment, which I believe is similar in your committees, to give every bill at least one hearing, and probably more than that to deal with it in subcommittee. The committee that I serve on is Commerce and Consumer Affairs. It's an eclectic committee. It covers economic development, it covers insurance, it covers liquor, it covers banking, it covers business. I am the chair of the liquor committee, which is not quite what it sounds like. Most of our work this time was really gratifying because it was working on bills and laws related to vaping and to youth tobacco. And I'm very proud to be a very important part, a very important cog of working on those bills. Because to tell people that I work on the liquor committee, it just doesn't sound like what I do. I've also served on a couple of commissions. One is New Hampshire Tourism, and one is kind of a companion committee to what Patty was talking about, which is a business environment for mental health providers. Unfortunately, the intervention of COVID-19 didn't allow us to take any of this to the kind of fruition that we were looking for. And so I think our work for the next session is cut out in part because of the past, and also in part because of the future, because COVID-19 is a driving force of potential that we don't even recognize yet. We don't quite know yet what will be happening in the future. So we'll return to some of these other issues that we started to talk about a little bit later, but I think what I'd like to do now is just kind of throw out some ideas that we might want to talk about, ideas that are very relevant. And I think one of the most relevant thoughts in most people's minds today is education. Patty, that obviously is the area that you've worked on. And of course, I don't want to say old, but I'm a former teacher, high school, college, public school, private school, English, special education, gifted and talented. I go the gamut too. So, and Willis, I know you've stepped up on behalf of education too. What do you think of what's going on in Manchester and education, given that, and I say this kindly, but given that we really don't have much education direction from the governor and from the commissioner, it's left to the local school boards to hammer out. I'll go with anyone who would like to start. Patty?
I think that Manchester has a really good plan theoretically in place. Can preschool through 1 go into classes? I think it's maybe 2 days a week, and everyone else do it remotely. I think the problem they're having now is teachers not being able to go into the building to be able to do their classes, so I think they're going to have to rethink the whole thing. I think the good thing about the remote that they're planning is that the plan is for teachers to go into class and actually teach each class remotely from their class and have the students participate from home. And I know that Manchester is working in conjunction with Southern New Hampshire University, who's, I think, #1 in the country for remote learning. So that will be a big help. But there are so many other issues. You know, students with the disabilities, students who won't learn unless they go in, students who get therapy. There's so many questions that I think it's going to be a day-to-day problem.
It's almost an impossible situation that we've put our school boards and the officials in all of our local communities, Manchester and the rest of the state, without any guidelines or funding coming from the governor's office. It's a really difficult situation that I think if you talk to the school board members as well, they don't necessarily want that responsibility. I think that that's a pretty safe thing to say, that they've responded well, and this responsible restart is, I think, the best that we can do at the moment. But the longer you have this conversation, the more factors will continue coming up. Patty mentioned quite a few, and they just continue to add on, whether it's talking about the money that hasn't been there for the community. So we're behind on school building aids, so now our ventilation systems are out of date, and making sure that there's clean air and new air coming in the buildings when kids are back in the classrooms. It's just one example. I know that Chromebooks were handed out, but kids are kids and things are going to get broken, and it's a really difficult situation. And I think that the two most important things, and we just have to keep checking in, are the mental health of the children and the teachers and the equity of the education that's available. And whether that's the remote access or otherwise, for me and I think for most in Manchester, mental health and equity have to be the questions that keep coming up while we discuss the responsible restart.
And before we go a lot further, I served for 4 years on the school board, and I know I've sat and watched the meetings and thought, I'm glad I'm not there. Those are decisions that are very heavy-duty decisions, and I just want to give a quick shout-out to my running mate, to my cohort, also in wards 10, 11, and 12, who is on the school board, and I admire her greatly. We had asked her to be here today, and it was not a good timing, and we'll have her on later on. But that is Jane Bolio, who's running in Ward 10, and she's also the school board representative from Ward 10, and I want to make sure that I mention that too. Some of the things that you mentioned bring to mind an interesting juxtaposition here, because the decisions are on the local level, but we in Concord make decisions that are umbrella decisions, not from necessarily the governor, but from the education committee when the four of us come to meet, and however that will be in the future is what I don't really know. We're facing rolling hotspots. There are communities up north that have very little COVID investment and infestation. I don't even know what my word is, but nonetheless, we'll go with it. And they can make different decisions than other areas that are hotspots, and they are rolling hotspots. There might be a flare here one day and a flare here another day. We have charge, for instance, of the state colleges, and there's some interesting things going on with funding at the community colleges. There are some waived costs that are there. I think the state in many ways is starting to make some good infrastructure changes, but I think I heard 21% is the current rate of infection of COVID-19 in our kids today, and that had not been the case. So I think it's going to be a daunting task for those of us that go back to Concord. And again, we all have primaries, so I hope you'll vote in the primary election so that you can keep us on the ballot for the general election. Sports. Sports kind of comes to mind when we're talking about education. Willis, you are deeply invested in youth sports.
I'm very, very invested in youth sports, and up until recently was coaching daily and coaching both private sessions and teams in Bedford, coaching for the club that's there now. And that, but prior to that, was at a school up north that is now bringing their students back, and I'm unsure if they're continuing their sports, but these student athletes train so hard and put so much time and effort, and it really is such an important tool for socialization and really building relationships and leadership skills and any other number of things. And we're starting to see some districts participating in sports, some youth leagues participating in sports. And as important as it is scary to see. And I've seen within the last few months the soccer fields covered with kids. And even at the beginning of the outbreak, when students are out of school, go by to see what's going on, and you've got 30 to 50 to 100 kids on their own playing, and they're doing what they should be doing and training and having fun, but it's part of the spread, and it's a really difficult situation to be in. I think the hard decision has to be made that we shouldn't be having student athletes, teachers, teams traveling across districts into other areas, because it's how it's going to spread, whether it's asymptomatic or someone showing signs and is able to play through it or whatever it might be. It's just not what we need at the moment, unfortunately.
And
I think Manchester voted the other night to have fall sports.
Right.
So it will be happening in Manchester, but there are other places in New Hampshire that have voted not to. So I don't know how scheduling is going to happen, or who they're going to be playing, or what. But it is another difficult decision.
Absolutely, and I just want to remind our viewers that we're talking to Representative Willis Griffith from Ward 11 and to Representative Rep.Patty Cornell from Ward 11. And because of your special interest, Patty, I'm going to throw it over to you. Social emotional learning, what is the role of that in our choices of education?
Well, up until now it's been a hodgepodge of what schools wanted to do. But it's funny because my commission was just about done, and we're doing our priorities. And one of the bills we did pass when we met at the Whittemore Center, when the bills were put together, was 1555, which included a Children's System of Care in Schools Act of 2020, which not funded at the moment, but every district will be implementing MTSSB, which is a 3-tier layer of care for children in our school systems. You know, the first tier is just like a general community-wide learning, respect, responsibility. The second tier is dealing with students who are having some difficulties, and the third tier is really targeted help. But every district can do it the way it best fits for them. So it's not like everybody has to do the same thing. It's the districts who have already implemented it and done it well took a couple of years to get input from parents, teachers, community members, stakeholders to what is going to work right. So, but as Dr. Goldhart said in one of the meetings in Manchester, our superintendent, that guidance counselors are going to be playing a big part in our return to school. And it was nice to hear him say, because I am a former guidance counselor, that he doesn't want them dumped on to be doing a lot of the little jobs and things. He wants them to be used actually as counselors to be helping kids get through this.
And as we kind of come toward the end of our time, incredibly, to the end of our time, I'd like to just quickly throw it over to the other end of the age spectrum. One of the bills that I had in that met demise because of COVID was a long-term care study bill. And I was not, there's no way that I have a crystal ball or anything of the sort, but I had seen issues in our long-term care facilities. I actually live in Ward 12. And along the route that I go home, there are a couple of long-term facilities as well as facilities for older citizens. And the bill did, because of COVID, the bill didn't go anywhere, but I had assembled a large group of people from AARP to all sorts of other groups with special interests for long-term care. And I think that's another place we're going to have to look again, because something like 80% of, I think I have the number, 80% of our 429 deaths in our state have come basically out of that long-term care group. And so I visualize us having some really important things ahead of us to look at. And just to defer back to what Willis said earlier, the word revenue, the word spending, those are all going to be issues as well. As we wind down, let me just throw my little pitch in, not necessarily for us, but for the idea that we need to have people in Concord that are going to look at all aspects, the young, the old, the income, property taxes. Patty, you mentioned property taxes. No one wants to see property taxes go up. We want to see good management of our money. And I think in that vein, it's important for us just to take a good, strong look at the people that we send up, whether it be those of us that are sitting here today, and I hope it is, or somebody else. We need to make sure those people are ready for those kinds of challenges. We have 1 minute left. 30 seconds, Willis.
On the spot. Well, I'm really glad I was able to join both of you today for this. There are so many issues that we need to support. Jobs up front as well. We need to make sure people are getting back to work and able to support their families, and that we're supporting businesses as well. So that's not something we've directly touched upon, but we need to make sure we're supporting our businesses as well.
And Patty?
I'd just like to throw in a little pitch, actually, for the three of us, because all three of us show up, we do our job, we put a lot of research into bills, and we work really hard for our communities. And I know we're really invested in Manchester, in our wards that we represent. So I am putting a little pitch, and I hope you'll vote for us on Election Day, September 8th.
And I will second that, and I'm sure Willis will third that.
Absolutely.
I think, especially given the unusual nature of our times, given COVID-19 and everything else that is incumbent upon the aftermath of COVID-19, we've got some tremendous tasks ahead of us, and we can't even sit here and predict those, which is a very difficult thing for us to do. I can tell you this, though, that we have probably 300 more topics that we would like to have spoken about. I have page after page here. The two people that I have with me are incredible legislators. They're incredible friends, and they're incredible assets to the state of New Hampshire. We'll be winding down at this time and taking a quick break and returning with a separate guest. But in the meantime, first of all, thank you to John Hopwood for allowing us this time. Thank you to Willis Griffith and to Patty Cornell, both from Ward 11, for your being here today, but more than that, for your service to our state and for the decency that you bring to the plate. We'll take a break now. We'll be back with another special guest and even a new host. Thank you very much.
My name is Connie Van Houten. I'm a candidate for re-election as the New Hampshire State Representative for District 45 in Manchester. District 45 includes the entire west side, Wards 10, 11, and 12. I am currently in my second term representing this district. I was born on the west side, graduated from West High, and am a west side homeowner. I taught at Memorial High School for 36 years, as well as in local colleges and in community programs for adults learning English as a second language. I served 2 terms on the school board as a representative of Ward 12. In the state legislature, I currently serve on the Commerce and Consumer Affairs Committee, where I work on legislation related to business, insurance, and liquor. I chair the subcommittee on liquor, where I work on bills related to vaping and youth tobacco as well. I also serve on commissions on New Hampshire tourism and the business environment for mental health providers. During this session, my second term, I sponsored legislation related to long-term care, the processing and retention of sexual assault kits, and teacher renomination. Among the bills that I co-sponsored are those on firearms on school property, criminal background checks for education personnel, and referral of minors convicted for alcohol and drug offenses. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, some of this legislation did not move forward, and it is my hope to return to Concord to champion their message. During my first term, I supported the expansion of Medicaid, I supported public education, including funding for kindergarten, and I voted in favor of marriage law reforms and against discriminatory practices. Then, and in this session too, I joined colleagues in efforts to set a minimum wage in New Hampshire and to establish a family medical leave insurance program. It is my hope to continue to work on behalf of New Hampshire citizens in the state legislature. It is my hope, for example, to continue to support education and to contribute to legislation that will support affordable health care and to improve mental health services. It is my hope to support bills that will contribute to the growing of New Hampshire's economy through our relationships with business. It is my hope to be a part of supporting renewable energy and energy conservation, and to be able to champion equal rights for all. It is, of course, my hope to return to the state legislature to support New Hampshire's efforts to safeguard the health, employment, housing, economy, education, and general well-being of New Hampshire citizens as we bring the lessons of the COVID pandemic to bear in Concord. I intend to listen to and represent Manchester's West Side in these matters and more. I'm running for re-election as a state representative in Wards 10, 11, and 12. My name is Connie Van Houten.
Hello, Manchester. I am State Representative Heidi Hamer, and I represent Ward 10 in Manchester, District 17, Hillsborough. Today I have the privilege to introduce you to Jerome Duvall, who is one of the Democratic candidates for Executive Council, District 4, in the September 8th primary. So Jerome is a New Hampshire native. He grew up on the west side of Manchester. Jerome has been very involved in the community. He previously served on the Manchester School Board, Board of Mayor and Aldermen, the City Planning Board, and was on the Board of Directors of Catholic Medical Center. Additionally, he served as president of the Greater Manchester-Nashua Board of Realtors. Welcome, Jerome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, let's start off. Tell us why you're running for executive council.
That's a good place to start. I was not planning on being on the ballot at all in 2020. And as things unfolded, and unfortunately, Kelly Boyer, a very dedicated, hardworking select woman from Goffstown, had put together a campaign, had reached out to a lot of people. I was on board. I was supporting her candidacy. And unfortunately, due to the effects of COVID, she's fine, she's well and everything, but due to the effects of COVID and things that happened in her life, she was forced to end her campaign very abruptly. And it was just at the start of getting close to filing period. A handful of people reached out to me and asked me to consider running. I in turn did the same thing. I reached out to other people to see if they had an interest in running. And as things worked out, I took a hard look at it, and it seemed to make sense. At this point in my life, I'm ready for a big birthday come January. I won't say how old I'll be, but I'm just in a position now in my life to step from the sidelines and contribute. And this was, it seemed logical, and it seemed to be fitting that I run for council. So that's where we're at.
Good, thank
Yep.
you. Jerome, the executive council, what is that? And not a lot of people know about it. Executive council is kind of unique to New Hampshire.
Yep.
And what are the responsibilities?
Constitutionally known as the Executive Council, commonly known as the Governor's Council. 5-member council, so there's 5 districts throughout New Hampshire, representing approximately the same amount of population, supposed to anyway by census. About 260,000 residents are represented in each district by their own council member. And it was constitutionally established to serve as a check on the governor. And limited in role to a certain extent. We're not a legislative body in that we don't enact laws, we don't create the budgets. We're kind of down, I call it sort of downstream from the legislative process. So that responsibility rests with you competent legislators, Patty and Connie and yourself. And then we end up with the budget, and we're told how much we can spend, or the governors, they can spend. But we are there to weigh in and on state contracts, anything in excess of $10,000. Very importantly, and I've talked about it quite a bit since I got into the race, and you'll continue to hear about this as a main issue of mine, appointment of judges. So the Executive Council can acts on the nominees put forth by the governor and can turn down, as we know, with the Attorney General McDonald nominee process. The council has tremendous authority in saying yes or no to the nominees the governor brings forth. Which brings me to a point, if you don't mind, if I can segue into one of my campaign platforms, is that the bench has not been terribly diverse since it was established 144 years ago. And I think it's regrettable, and frankly, it's unacceptable. About 116 Supreme Court justices have been named to the bench in its 144-year history. All but 3 have been men. Now, I understand that, during the course of our history in New Hampshire, given our demographics here, I can understand that to a point. But where's the commitment now? Where's the effort now to change the pathway so that we end up with a more diverse bench? A bench that's much more representative of what we have now for today in New Hampshire for our population. Better than 50% of our population is women.
Yeah.
And yet the bench has only 3 in its history, 144 years, 1 currently serving. And it's a 5-member bench. It's unacceptable. And by the way, the Superior Court in New Hampshire, consisting of about 26 justice positions, there's only 6 of the 26 that are currently women. So they're not faring much better. So the diversity is lacking, and I think that an executive council can play a pivotal role. And I understand the argument is, and I had this recently with my opponent in the primary, his position was, well, the governor makes the nominees for the bench. That's true. But a council, if proactive, can play a significant role in changing the process. It should not be exclusive to only white men who are politically connected to be considered for the bench. I think that it should be a much more open process, much more engaged. And I think that, in a sense, the districts, the council districts throughout New Hampshire should serve as a feeder to the governor in terms of potential, those that are qualified to be nominated. Involve the community more. And I think in that way we end up with a bench that I think is much more, it's important to our judicial system, it really is.
So that
Didn't want to get on a tangent, but I'm
That's
just...
okay. That was one of my questions here. Judicial appointments fall under the responsibility of the Executive Council, and you told me all about what your qualities and the skills would be for that. Thank you.
Sure.
So let's talk about contracts. You know, with your experience being on the school board, mayor and alderman board, and now with your real estate, you must deal a lot with contracts.
I do, and I've had that experience, as you pointed out. My experience on the school board, I was in the principal negotiating team. You know, we had to deal with contracts a lot, and also the size and magnitude of these budgets are very involved, so I have that background and experience, and also there's a professional element. I work with a lot of attorneys in my profession as a real estate broker, so I do have exposure to contracts. But I've said it, and I mean this sincerely. Look, I've never said I'm the smartest guy in the room. And I do believe that in government, especially in a position like this, there is some learn as you go. The question is, you know, are you the right person who's going to ask the tough questions? Do you know what questions to ask to get the information that you're looking for that's most important to your constituents when it comes to the I's being dotted and T's crossed in these contracts and how the money's being allocated? So I think to me, that's the more important question. You can always get assistance from people that are smarter than you about any subject matter. That's life. And the question I think voters should ask themselves in the Democratic primary is who's better suited to do that. My opponent has tremendous experience being head of a large union for most of his career. So he has seen some things that I haven't seen. He brings that experience to the table. That's great. But the question is, I think, is who has the better temperament to be able to reach across the aisle, to be able to work with a governor that the people elect in New Hampshire, be they Republican or Democrat. I think it requires a certain presence about you. I think it's one thing to be able to pound your fist on the table when necessary, but I think more importantly than that, you have to be able to dig in and do the homework. I did say, and I don't mean to drop names, but that's what I admired about Chris Pappas when he was a counselor. Chris was not necessarily a lightning rod all the time. I thought he was effective because he did his homework. He's extremely bright. And I would hope to emulate some of that style as well if I'm elected counselor. So that's my take on it.
Chris is a favorite of mine too. Yes. So.
Still is.
So let's go on. You know, there's been a lot of discussion about the pandemic and how the governor's been handling it. And do you think the Executive Council should have had more, larger play in it and some of the decisions that the governor has already made? You know, isn't...
Look, I think that in the role of Executive Counselor, if you want to be proactive, it's one thing, as I said, I pride myself in being able to bridge the divide between the two parties. But I do think there are instances, especially with what you're referring to, the $1.25 billion that came to New Hampshire and the pandemic relief aid package. And I think the governor made a mistake. Mm-hmm. I think he was wrong. Let me be very plain about it. There should have been a much more open and transparent process. If only for the sake of good governance and the appearance of good ethics. Open it up. I don't like the idea of closed door, anything. I don't practice that in my day-to-day business as a real estate professional. And you wouldn't expect that from me if I was elected your governor's counselor, especially when it comes to government spending. Key legislators at least should have been involved, both from the House and Senate side. And I think people from outside the process should have been involved too. Like I said, there's tremendous wealth of knowledge from other people that don't necessarily have the time or desire to serve, but they're accessible, right? Plenty of bright people out there, and I think it was a mistake. and I would have called the governor out on it if I was sitting in that position.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, because he shouldn't have had so much power, where he has his executive council that he relies on for help.
Exactly. I think
You know.
certainly if you're looking to create opportunity to have a synergy with the council that you're elected to serve with, I think a minimum amount of decorum is to at least give the appearance that you're willing to work with them,
Yeah,
right? Engage
yeah.
them in the process. And that's what I'm talking about. It's not, putting partisan politics aside, this pandemic doesn't know party lines. It could care less. It's wreaking havoc in the lives of many, many people. It's costing people their life's fortunes, their jobs, their health. And it should have been, as far as I'm concerned, out of the political arena and managed in such a way that was much more engaging and a much more open process. I think, like I said, I think it was a mistake, and I would have called them out.
So, if you were elected, how would you interact and stay in touch with your constituents?
One of the primary responsibilities and roles of an executive council, I think, is to reach back into the communities they serve. Now, the 4th Council District has 18 towns and 1 city, Manchester.
Quite spread all
It is.
around.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. It's spread all around, down to Londonderry and then towards the coast, Barrington and Lee and Nottingham and west over to Bow and then Bedford. It's spread out. It's, like I said, 260,000 some odd residents who live in the district. And I think it's incumbent upon the council, I think, to keep abreast of what's going on the local level. And all these towns and municipalities within the district have pressing concerns. I've been invited by selectmen to go in and speak before their boards, and I think it takes a commitment to do that, to reach back and to speak with people that are at the local level, to find out, what the interest level is, what issues they're being confronted with, and how the council can best facilitate a process to affect change or to assist and aid the communities in any way possible. That's vital. It's another reason why I think you can't have someone that's so dead set on any issue. There has to be some pliability. That's what government's all about. It should be what it's about, I think. So that you can work with people when it comes to getting the job done for your constituents.
Reminds me of autism, somebody that has autism. The window is either all the way open or all the way shut.
Exactly.
There's no in between. You have to be kind of
That's right.
flexible.
That's right. You do.
Yeah.
You have to be pliable. I think, stand for what you stand for.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of it. Don't be ashamed of it. Don't run from it. I think that's really good. I said during a recent forum that one of my most prized mentors in politics, and I mean this sincerely, happened to be a Republican executive counselor. Ray Burton was dedicated for decades as an executive counselor, and I remember as a young guy reaching out to him, and I forget what it was for, but here I am from Manchester, and I'm reaching out to a counselor from way up north, and he got back to me with a handwritten note and his business card saying, "Hey, call me anytime. I'm going to try to get you this information." I was very much impressed by that. He wasn't even my counselor to begin with. Here I am from Manchester. I'm viewed as the city guy, and he's up north in the small towns. The point is that he looked beyond partisan politics, and he wanted to do what was right and in the best interest of people. And I think Ray, over his career, demonstrated that by supporting causes on both sides of the aisle. And he was very successful at doing it during a time when the North Country was ultra conservative. So they reelected him, and they rewarded him with reelection because he did a good job.
I know you're very well known in Manchester and surrounding, and
That's what happens
selling
when you're.
real
That's what happens
estate.
when you're getting ready to hit a milestone birthday. That's what happens.
And you graduated from West High, did you?
I did.
Yes,
Go
I
blue.
did too.
That's right.
Yes,
That's right.
and yeah, and it's all changed there now.
A lot of changes, and I pride myself with the fact that I've lived on both sides of the city by now, both sides of the river, and went to West High School. But I represented Ward 10 on the school board.
Yeah.
Represented Ward 4 as an alderman. And I've been elected to the Charter Commission citywide, and so roots that go pretty deep now. And I remember being in the kitchen at Patty's mother's house.
Oh,
Years ago, I forget who I was supporting. An old friend of mine, Leo Bernier, and I went over there to see Viola about something to have to do with the campaign. I remember Judy when she was just a young teenager. And and I served with Viola, her mother, on the school board. That's when a time when her mother was smoking, and they were still smoking in the school administration building. And you could not tell her mother not to smoke, I'll tell you. Viola would
Oh, my goodness.
she'd tell you, yeah, give you a piece of her mind. Times have changed, but
Yes.
Yeah, Manchester has been good to me, and I'm hoping to do well
Yeah,
here in the city. That's a big part of the district.
yes.
Between Manchester, Hooksett, and Goffstown and Bedford, just about close to 2/3 of the vote.
Yeah.
So obviously, having Greater Manchester and some familiarity with, is important. It's going to play a big role.
So when you were in Ward 4 as your alderman, you also had Jerome's Deli on Bridge Street. I
Good
drive
memory.
by that every single day, it seems like, to go up to my son's house. And
Good memory. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a dilapidated little corner store, and my wife and I bought it. We recreated it into more of a deli and catering format. We created it, restored the building, and eventually sold it to a gentleman by the name of Jerome, so that it carries
Oh.
on my name. We had it as Dairyfield Deli,
yeah.
under the park, and
Oh.
the original, of course, Manchester originally was Dairyfield.
Yeah.
But we sold it to a gentleman, and as just luck would have it, I guess, his name was Jerome as well.
Good.
And
Is he
so-
still the current owner?
He's still the current owner.
Oh,
He's
good.
still there. We sold it 15 years ago.
Wow.
Hard to believe, yeah. So I've been in the real estate business
Yeah.
full time as a broker now for that time. Yep.
Well, I'm kind of boring. I've always lived on the west side at Ward 10, and you were my school board member way back.
Social media right now is the primary format for campaigning with the pandemic. Safe distancing and all, no shaking hands and all that stuff. It's hard for us politicians because we can't really shake hands, and knocking
No.
on doors right now is
No.
kind of not a good thing to do. I had a young lady reach out to me through Facebook who still lives in Manchester, and she remembers that I knocked on her mother's door. She had just turned 18 and was getting to vote for the first time in a municipal election. And she reached out and said, I remember you knocked on my door and you asked me for my vote. And she said, now I'm happy to support you for governor's council, all these years ago.
Wow.
April King Broderick, if you're listening, I'm mentioning
Oh,
your name
yes.
tonight.
Her
So-
mother works at the polls with us. She's a ballot inspector.
April still remembers that
Yeah.
visit.
Marie.
I have to be honest with you, I vaguely do. I do remember
Yes.
her in
Yes.
particular, and I remember visiting the house. I can kind of remember where it is. Is her mother still there?
Yes.
Really?
Yes,
No kidding.
Patterson Street, I think it is.
Yeah,
or-
yeah. Okay,
in
there you
that
go.
area.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice people. Very nice people.
Very nice people.
Yeah.
I'm going to see her mother tomorrow, Marie.
No kidding.
Yeah, we're going to go to
Tell-
City Hall. We have to count our ballots, get them
Okay.
ready. I'm also the ward clerk in Ward 10, so
Yes, I tell you, that is a tough
yeah,
position
it's
right
gonna
now.
be hard.
Hats off to the people that are running the
Yes.
elections.
Yes.
Yeah, my dad did it for years in Ward 12 many years ago,
Mm-hmm.
back in the 70s and through the Reagan Revolution, and I remember those days back then.
yeah.
Yeah,
So as we wrap up, we have a couple more minutes.
sure.
Any final thoughts on your campaign? I know you're doing social media, and you're getting a lot of publicity that way. People are coming out of the woodwork and saying, "Oh, I know him," and supporting you.
It's been a humbling experience, and I'm very, very grateful. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention again Kelly Boria, because she had campaigned for months and put together a very viable, very credible campaign. And I'd followed the campaign, and I had embraced her candidacy. She was developing a tremendous amount of enthusiasm, and for a young lady, she's taking on a guy that's been around, like Ted Gatzis, who has plenty of reserves in the tank, so to speak.
Oh, yes.
It was quite a formidable undertaking that she was prepared to do. And then to just be hit like that, it was really, really, I think, must have been heart-wrenching an experience. And I know it was. I met with her after and before I filed. In fact, I sought her counsel at the time that I decided to run. And so hats off to her. But social media is kind of interesting, and I'm not unfamiliar. It's not unfamiliar to me because, of course, I do some of it with my business. That's the way people engage these days. And I think for a community, I do follow Facebook. There's, Patty's husband Rick posts quite a bit, and I enjoy keeping in touch with people that way, even if it's from the distance. Mm-hmm. You're kind of peering in through the window to see how people are doing and what they're up to, and the various stories they share about their lives. It's a way to follow people and engage. The number of people that have come back to me through social media that I haven't seen in years is just, even if I don't succeed, I'm happy to do that. It's been worthwhile. Mm-hmm. And I mean that sincerely. I've never set out to be a career politician. It's just not in my DNA. I take my hat off to people that do it. People like Jean Shaheen and others that I met Jean Shaheen years ago when I was a kid campaigning for John Durkin for the U.S. Senate when I was just a little kid. That's not been the path that I took in life. I do think now that I'm in a position to serve, this is one way I can do it effectively. I think it's really kind of tailor-made for someone that has my skill set, personality, my temperament. But the people that have reached out through social media, people that I haven't seen in years, teachers and faculty from West, incredible show of support. It's gratifying, and I think when voters head to the polls, I think there is something to consider when you're looking at a candidate. I think a part of it, anyway, a piece of the pie, is looking at who they're with, so to speak, who they're surrounded by. And that's one thing I've always prided myself in. And that's what makes it so humbling, and I'm so grateful for the people that have come forward to support me, a bunch of really, really good people. And I'm happy to get the endorsement of Gray Chenoweth. Gray Chenoweth has been a great advisor. He was the nominee for council 2 years ago.
Yes.
Exceptionally bright young man, has built a couple of companies now. Obviously, technology is his thing. We're on opposite ends of the spectrum with that. But he's just a great sounding board. He's given me great advice, and I'm really honored to have his endorsement. Yeah.
I have a Jean Shaheen story. Years ago, there was we were meeting the Moore Center. We had a pie baking contest. There was only a few entries, but I entered my special apple pie, and she was one of the judges, and I got second place.
No kidding.
So I'll always remember that.
She liked your pie.
Yes.
That's great.
Yes. We've always been a big supporter of Jean Shaheen's too. Yes.
Yeah. Campaigns were so much different then. I remember, speaking of John Durkin's campaign, I don't know if Patty might remember this, Connie maybe, but on North Elm Street, I think it was the old Red Cross building, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe it was a building that's now gone. Yeah. But I remember walking there as a kid, and it was just, all these rooms were all loaded with volunteers. Yeah. And Dick Dunphy was there, and Donnie Langdon, and some throwbacks that were involved heavily in Democratic politics back in the day. And it was people licking stamps, licking envelopes, stuffing envelopes. Yeah. I mean, all the signs were put together by hand. There was none of this plastic stuff. A lot of them were painted by hand.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it was just such and phone banks, literally desks, long tables with phones, people making calls. Just such a different environment now. It's changed so dramatically.
Yes.
It's so different. So different. You kind of miss some of that close person-to-person contact,
Back then, my husband Gary and John Hopwood, who were stealing his show.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. They used to work on the campaigns too, and the stories they had, back then, they loved it too. And
much more.
Still on it.
Yeah. It's one thing. It's a little bit, and I think any candidate, you were able to speak, whether it be Jean Shaheen or people that have been around a long time. Part of that element, I think, is lost. I think, there's a heavy influence of money, and I think it's really, you have to always be vigilant. I think about bringing it back to the people, and making sure that they have a stake in this process as best you can. It shouldn't be all about outside influence. I know money's a very real thing, and you have to fund campaigns, and it's a challenge for candidates to do. It's just the reality of where we're at today. But I think if you can try to create those connections with people as much as you can along the way, I think it's really important. Yeah.
We have a few more minutes. Just tell me about your background growing up in Manchester. You were in Ward 12, you said?
Grew up in Ward 12. Back then, there was a big, you remember, cultural divide back in Manchester back in the day. I grew up at a time when a tremendous amount of people, especially in Ward 12 and 11, were bilingual.
Oh, yes. Yes.
My relatives all migrated from Canada, and but interestingly, I started my primary education at St. Patrick's. My folks ended up at St. Patrick's Parish, and my siblings and I ended up at St. Patrick's until it closed, and then ended up at Goslar Parkton. It was, I think it was 4th and 5th grade, if I'm not mistaken. Mr. Oleniak, I'll never forget him. Wonderful teacher. And then Parkside Junior High School, one of my most ardent supporters, Jocelyn Messier.
Oh, yes, yes.
Got a nice card in the mail from her yesterday. She's running for state rep over in Deerfield.
Yes. And
Go Jocelyn.
I work with Christopher at the polls. He's the moderator. I'm the ward clerk.
Exactly. And of course, their mother was a state rep.
Irene, yes.
You know, and this, you know, speaking of which, just real quick story. There's another person who Republican, if you remember,
yes.
Irene Messier, was a state rep from Ward 10, which was predominantly Democratic back in the day. Still is.
Yes.
And yet Irene got elected and elected over and over again.
Irene was a sweetheart.
She was a sweetheart,
Yeah.
but very pragmatic and able
Yeah.
to hold her own positions.
Yeah.
Women's issues were very important to her. She was ahead of her time, I think, for this area. And you know, you could work with someone like Representative Messier.
Yeah.
You know, good luck to Jocelyn over in Deerfield. She's got a tough
And I didn't
road over there.
realize she never drove, but she would always be able to make it up to the State House
Right.
through rides.
She had a good son in Christopher, I'll tell you.
yes,
Christopher
yes.
was very, very dedicated and loyal
Yeah.
to his mother. Good for him.
Yes. The whole family is wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. Just, I don't know how much time we have.
Oh,
A couple of minutes. There's one
couple
thing
minutes.
I did want to share because
sure.
because one of my experiences on the school board, and I regret that sometimes it escapes me, but I was on the school board in the late '80s, and it's relevant now because of all the tension we have right now with the call for social justice reform. And I was on the school board when it was brought up that the Manchester schools would have a holiday in honor of Martin Luther King. Tremendously controversial. It just goes to show how far we've come. Still far to go, obviously. But it was an absolute all-out battle. And the experience came back to me in a wave because I went to the Black Lives Matter vigil at Stark Park. And it was such an impressive gathering. For people that have not attended one, I would just take a step back and maybe consider going just once. Because what I thought I was going to experience, I didn't experience at all. You could hear a pin drop. It was outdoors, of course, Stark Park. It was dark out. And you could hear a pin drop and just hear the rustling of the leaves. And I was just moved by the presentations given by the young people, story after story after story. And these were people that were within our community, kids that were brought up and raised here and gone through our public school system. Some of them just horrifying, but heart-wrenching. And it came over me like a wave that, you know, reaching back to my history being on the school board when the Martin Luther King holiday was brought up. And I remember getting home as a young parent then. I had 2 young children who were now in their 30s. And we had the voice machines. We didn't have now through, right? They were press the button and run. And I remember getting home after long meetings at the school board and hearing messages from people that just weren't very nice. So we've come a long way. We have a long ways to go.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure being here.
Thank you. And best of luck on
Thank
September 8th.
you so much. Thank you. Get out and vote.
Get out
Jerome
and
Duvall,
vote.
Executive Council. Thank
Get
you.
your absentee ballot.
Yep.
Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you.